All right, good morning. Thank you all for joining us on the second part of our book club discussion for this weekend. We are in the middle of chapter 4 of From Here to Equality, and that's why we're starting a discussion today. I usually forget to say this, but if you're watching this on YouTube, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and if you are here in the chat, thank you all for joining us on this Sunday morning. I really appreciate you all taking additional time from your weekend to finish this discussion. All right, so let's get started.
Uh, are you saying anything? Because if so, you froze. Yeah.
Oh, Kiara froze.
Written from chapter 4,
Yeah,
past
you froze
page
for a second.
39.
You missed a little bit of what you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's because it's like slightly rainy and the internet's a little bit unstable. I just got a notice, but I was
Okay.
saying that if anyone has any notes or comments past page 39 or past where in chapter 4 the book is talking about Bacon's rebellion.
You said
Uh,
page 39?
She said
Yeah,
anything past 79.
Okay.
like my next notes are from Bacon's rebellion, and I made a note of in what ways did the plantation owner class view cross-racial alliances made during the Jamestown, Virginia rebellion as a threat? And the result was it signified the pathway to laws against Black Americans. But so if we want to start there today with Bacon's Rebellion and how that resulted in specific laws passed against Black Americans to prevent cross-racial alliances.
Constitutional alliance, is that something within vision? Okay.
Yeah, page 72. And I
Okay.
know you said the headright system predated Bacon's Rebellion, but the Virginia House of Burgesses, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Jefferson came from. They passed this law, the partus, excuse my Latin, but the partus sequitur ventrum. That doctrine
yeah.
reverses a practice dating back to Roman law that conferred the legal status of a child's father to the child. That deadbeat baby daddy law that the slave
Right.
masters were, that, took the economic responsibility away from this, basically turned Black women into instruments of capital, and it controlled our
Yeah.
reproductive lives. It made us sex objects, objects of race. So that's where that womanism comes out. Comes out with this. That law right there in 1662. For me, I know you talked about Bacon's Rebellion, but that right there law it seems like set the stage for more laws, as we will see. But for me, that really stood out. That right there.
It was against morale.
And it was against, morality. But looking back in history, I'm an avid reader, and I read about the Borgia Pope. And the Borgias, he was a pope, but he had like 6 illegitimate kids. And I'm saying this, and that the white Jesus that we see on most paintings, that's Sister Borgia. And I guess I'm saying that throughout history, all men have been made to take care of their offspring, you know, and for this law to take effect, to me, you know, to me, that was the start of our demise in this country as far as and lineage matters, you know, due to this. And that's what I have to add.
I think with that law is why it's important, or why I distinguish between Black ADOS, or I put an emphasis on the Black part, because as you know, um, slave masters were raping the Black women, and that created offspring. And I think there was like a kind of like obviously a stigmatism, or a stigma, not stigmatism, but a stigma against that, and that's where you get into racial passing. Black people who looked like they were white and passed for white and identify as white, even though they came from the same background, the same lineage as Black ADOS, but in that they would not qualify.
We lost you for a
Gary,
second.
you froze.
Yeah, we can't. We're losing you.
As us, but they chose a different path.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess for me, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Miss Alvonia.
Oh, well, for me, with the colorism and stuff like that, I guess a lot of our ancestors passed out of necessity. You know, I guess it was downright survival. Again, I guess when we look at the lineage of Thomas Jefferson, you know, with his lineage, and you know what, with most of ours, think about it, if you could pass during this period of time, would you pass? And then you have to realize, to bring it forward in this present day, we still have people who are past, who have infiltrated and assimilated to whiteness. Is it right? Is it moral? Right, but this is my mother's grandfather, and he didn't pass. And sometimes we wonder about him, you know, why he didn't, because he clearly should. And he knew his white offspring, and he had a pretty good relationship. But my mother's family in Mississippi were fortunate Black, but this was my mother's grandfather, and he never passed, which clearly he could have, but he never did. And my question is why he didn't, because I understood why some of us did. But, you know, the question is we have why he didn't. But that's just me and our personal story. And, but the colorism is there. That's all I have. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, you're fine. So I was just gonna add, just going back to when we were talking about Bacon's Rebellion and the subsequent laws that that were instituted after that. It's you know, the whatever that Greek Latin term was, what is it, precipitous sequitur ventum or something like that. Basically, it actually means, it translates to offspring follows the belly. which led to, you know, increased amounts of, you know, I guess you could say, like, you know, deadbeat fathers and women being raped, you know, for the sake of creating a new workforce, so to speak. And while at the same time, they let the fathers off the hook. And I wonder, honestly, if that was like one of the precursors. I mean, I guess a lot of this is a precursor, but I wonder if this in particular was one of the precursors to the Casual Killing Act, where they could casually kill slaves without being impugned in any sort of way. So, and I know that, like, during that, or as a result of that, that rebellion, the natives and blacks were armed, while at the same time they said that no Christian could be a slave. I found that to be kind of interesting, in that, you know, we kind of touched on that yesterday, but here it is, actual legislation is being put in place. We're seeing it right here. What was that? I think it was in 1680. They said that, and y'all forgive me, I'm following along, but I'm using an audio book, so I don't have the physical book in front of me, so I don't have pages to go by. But I know it said that basically, you know, slaves couldn't raise their hands to the servants who were also in their, you know, under servitude within their homes, which in essence put the servants on par with the masters, and gave them, you know, that much of a foothold or step up above the, you know, the slave workforce that they had at the time. I just thought that was kind of interesting, and I you know, just wondered, as far as, you know, that ruling, and you know, like I said, if that actually led to, or if you all think as well that led to the Casual Killing Act that we ended up seeing later on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to bring up what the result of these laws transferred all the children born to slave mothers into human property. Basically, it took the humanity away from the children born to enslaved mothers, and I think that is uniquely it's unique how it corresponds to the HBCU. We know what Lincoln University was founded by black veterans, ex-slaves. But most of the HBCUs were founded by, I guess we can say, I think it was founded on white guilt. I think this was the way the white slave masters created a lot of the HBCUs for their children, which created a class, you know, a class distinction among blacks. Because there is a class distinction among blacks as well as a class distinction among whites. And just as much as race, class plays an integral part as well for blacks to a certain extent. And I think that's, you know, is also something that needs to be noted as well.
Okay, that's a good point. Actually, in the digital audio, version of the book, there's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, and it says, in 1820, he says, "I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man of the farm." I think that, so, and we all know the history, the story of Thomas Jefferson as it relates to Black American slaves. So I think even in that, it says a lot about how slave masters viewed the relationship between them and their slave children. There, in that there really wasn't one of what we consider a traditional parent to child relationship.
Mhm.
Those slaves, even though they had came from their seed, they were still property. They were still there just to fill whatever needs were of the plantation. I'm not. You made a good point about how HBCUs created a buffer class between I guess the few
Uh-oh.
You froze again.
Yeah. But she's probably talking about the few who were educated versus the ones who weren't among the
We straddle with student loans.
Student loan debt.
Mm-hmm.
mhm. Yeah.
I want to write my university and ask them to institute Dr. Darity book in the curriculum for freshmen.
Mm.
I want a refund on that Civil War class I
I want a
took.
refund, period.
Yeah. Kiara, you are still frozen.
Yeah, I don't know if she can move or something or what she can do.
Uh-oh.
Okay, she's probably gonna come back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Looks like
Says,
she was disconnected.
yeah.
yeah, it says I'm the host now, so I
Eh?
don't know. But yeah, I mean, I'll say, and this is as somebody who actually went to an HBCU. So I went to Grambling. Um, I definitely think that there could be some or there's some sorry, there's some credence to what you're saying as far as having this book as part of the curriculum. I definitely believe it's something that could help us move things forward exponentially, and maybe that would be in the long term. Maybe that could be a move that we could end up actually making or being something that we could actually push for in terms of pushing the ADOS strategy. Like, we can't just do it all ourselves, of course, but if we can get the kids, we can get our youth educated on why this is important, on why this is a necessity, and why we should fight and strive for this. That in 2, 3, 4 years, by the time they matriculate, could lead into a whole completely, reinforced groundswell of support that we could have, in our efforts.
Kiara, what was you saying? You froze up. You froze up for about maybe 15, 20 seconds. You were speaking
About HCB.
HBCUs and the buffer class. We heard none of your comment. Could you repeat that, please? Is she still froze?
Oh, no,
Yeah, she's still
Yeah,
frozen.
she had froze again. Yep.
She up now.
You up
She
now. Could you repeat your comment you were making? You froze on us.
Now she's muted. You muted.
You're
baby.
muted.
Okay.
Yeah, my internet is unstable, so I'm trying to connect to my mobile hotspot. So forgive.
Uh-oh. It ain't working either. Mm-mm. Technical difficulties, it seems like it's going to be the theme of the day.
Yeah, pretty much.
There you go.
So I'm back now, but it keeps going in and out. So we can just move on. Yeah, my next comment was about how how the Republicans had pushed for the end of slavery and what made them stop. Like, why didn't our allies, or back then, why didn't they continue to push for the abolishment of slavery?
Because it was profit.
Money, greed, good old American greed. They knew they could not generate the products needed. And I think the underlying theme is further reading the not only the Civil War, but the Revolutionary War was actually to preserve slavery. And with that being said, the Revolutionary War was also to preserve a way of life. Remember, when they had the Revolutionary War, they were trying to maintain, I guess we got to go back and realize that Great Britain ended slavery with the Somerset case, and that was in the late 17, the Somerset case. Even though Great Britain on the books it was 1833, but they kind of did a de facto ended slavery in Great Britain, and I want to say 1798 with this case with Somerset, but the United States, you know, again, warped and twisted the meaning. They were trying to maintain their way of life without being under the control of a monarchy, but wanted their freedom, but maintain control of another class of people. Because what we have to realize, Thomas Jefferson's the rough draft to the Constitution didn't look anything about what actually came out. And he talked about, and this is briefly, he, the King of Britain, has waged cruel war against human nature itself and violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of distant, what is that? Give me a second. A person of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. You know, again, the hypocrisy of the U.S., the injustice, the country was founded on injustice. Yes, they did consider barring slavery, but again, back to that question you asked, the economic advantage of slavery was so great. They went against moral law and human law. And you know what? What's the greatest crime against humanity besides slavery? And that's it. That's all I have with that comment.
I guess I just kind of want to add to that a little bit, just in that, and so yeah, I agree that, you know, the Revolutionary War was also fought for slavery. I mean, at the time, Britain was hugely in debt with France, you know, prior to that, because they were fighting with France on U.S. soil for territory. And when they established, you know, that slavery would be the law of the land, that helped to create the quickest economic base for the United States. You know, that, you know, to basically help to propel them into, you know, into the future. And I thought it was kind of interesting that, you know, there was like small colonies, smaller areas that were still, you know, controlled by other countries and stuff. Like they in the book, it talked about that one in Pennsylvania that was controlled by Germany, that for about 15 years or so, they were, you know, an anti-slavery colony, but not so much because they wanted to help Black people, but just because they were like, well, where are the poor white people supposed to go? So that was more so just to help establish a place for poor white people to be. And so I thought that was interesting. But yeah, Thomas Jefferson, that dude was Yeah. I mean, because what was it? He said that not only was the British in conflict, or he spoke about the inhumanity, or I guess the hypocrisy of Britain, in that Britain was not in, for any other reason, they weren't in conflict with Africa. They were only engaged with with Africa because of the slave trade. But then on the other hand, he was saying that it was wrong. This is Jefferson saying it was wrong to offer freedom to the slaves who were fighting against the people who were who instituted their capture in the first place. Which I just found like, man, that's like a whole bunch of legal gymnastics that you're gonna have to do, and moral gymnastics that you have to do to get to that position where you're saying, well, yeah, I'm acknowledging the fact that they're in the slave trade for the wrong reasons, but at the same time, they can't use those slaves to fight against us because we want to perpetuate slavery. Wait, wait a minute, what are you doing? Like, what? To me, that doesn't make any sense. So I just thought that was interesting.
I'm about to embarrass me, ain't you?
What happened? You say something, Miss Alvanya?
Oh, I just wanted to comment about this. I have to tell you, this chapter 4, I have to decompress after reading this. It is so much, but I wanted to bring out that what I love what Mullen and Darity did. They gave us the receipt, and I wanted us to really acknowledge of the 2.5 million inhabitants in 1776, 500,000 were Black. So we were 25% of the population in 1776. And we need, and when slavery started, we were indentured servitude. We were part of that class, but again, they focused in on the phenotype of being Black, and that was that the white elites campaign with the poor whites, and basically I guess ran a verbal campaign to make it anti-Blackness. But at one point, we were 25% of the population in the 13 colonies, and that was in 1776.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make light of how we, at that point, was 25% of the population, and how in a matter of 10 years, how the number of enslaved people had magnified, 100-fold, but that's all I have. I do have another point, but I'm gonna try to find it in the book, about basically how this country just grew exponentially with slaves. To meet, I'm glad Chris spoke about, the British. The colony states, they had 2 goals with slavery: to do something with the labor problem. Remember, the colonies, they colonized, the Americas, but they had a problem of labor in Great Britain as well as in America. And they didn't want to lose their white indentures. Slavery provided it provided for the labor shortage. They didn't have to worry about losing whites or having to pay whites higher labor. It was some type of way that slave labor answered the wage and labor problem in Great Britain, and it was like the watered down effects happened in the colonies. And the colonies did not really mind up until they start getting taxed. Everybody was complacent with this way of life as long as it did not interfere with their personal happiness. And that's all I
Yeah.
have right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It was like it basically just allowed it while on one end it gave their servant class well it helped to maintain the servant class first of all, because now it gave them somebody to be on top of. So in England they had, when they had their servant class of white people, they were the ones who were in essence in charge of the slaves who were underneath them. So now they had a step up in life. That was, the equivalent of, cops and or I should say overseers that became the cops that we see nowadays. Who feel like, well, my station in life is, even if I'm low on a totem pole in my realm, I'm at least above you, which is to them that's tantamount to their sustainability as well as their survival. When we were talking about the Revolutionary War, I thought it was that part where it talked about Rhode Island in particular, that they had basically they promised freedom to any slave who had enlisted into the war. So anybody who enlisted, and they would, they would be guaranteed freedom after the war and all that. And what was it? They had, I think they had to sign up for like a 2-year minimum or something like that. But I thought that was wild that it said that even then, with those slaves, and there was only 88 who had signed up, with those slaves who had signed up, like as soon as they got out, as soon as the war was over, there were still, unscrupulous means that were used, and I think you actually use the word unscrupulous to basically take those freed black men and find a way to put them back into slavery. So we've seen this on both sides. We've seen from Britain, we've seen from the United States, on various fronts that they have made there's been a lot of mouth talk, a lot of mouth service done to establish or say that, okay, we're going to support you, we'll help you. Whereas the actions that were to follow up with that verbal support never came or never materialized into anything that was substantive for the people who were looking for that. And I'll take that even further to say, like, we see that today when it comes to Republicans and Democrats, whereas, Democrats will say, we're going to support you, we're going to support everybody, we love everybody and all this. And the Republicans will say, well, we only want for our people, but if you come over here, we'll take care of you. But at the end of the day, neither side is really doing anything to really help us. And I think that's something that we need to always stay mindful of, not only when dealing with this book, but in our normal, going out, normal interactions. Not to say that, you always need to be on alert or anything like that, but at least just be mindful of the fact that, it's not what a person says, it's what a person does that makes them who they are. So anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say before we get into the 3/5 compromise and all that or whatever.
It is, I think it's close to 10 o'clock. So we might have to move on to chapter 5. We have to like roll this conversation into chapter 5.
Okay.
All right, so I only had just one note from chapter 5. In May 1860, the 36th Congress declared neither Congress nor local legislature can abolish slavery. The federal government is duty-bound to protect slave owners and holders of other forms of property in U.S. territories. Later on in the book, Darity and Mullen wrote about how Congress actually went against this. But for now, I wrote my thought on that was, if the U.S. federal government was duty bound to protect slave owners, then once chattel slavery was against federal law, the government then became duty bound to protect freed Black Americans, um, men, women, and children. After the end of the Civil War, a Black ADOS reparations agenda should have been implemented. So that's just the one thought I had.
Mhm. I'll let Miss Alvania go before I say anything.
You're still on mute.
Chris, go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, okay. So I'll just say I think that yeah, I mean it was a short chapter, but yeah, I get that. I thought that was hugely telling, that May 1860 quote. Yeah, I thought that was hugely telling, just for, just more, and we'll see that throughout the, throughout the thematics of the book, that we'll see those legislative efforts that are being made to make sure that a certain people, us Black people, stay subjugated and relegated to a certain class, certain state in life, or a certain space. And like, so some of the highlights that I saw in the chapter that were kind of interesting were again, I'm from Chicago, born and raised, so just seeing some of this stuff was kind of interesting. It said that was in 1862, escaped slaves couldn't even enter the state of Illinois, followed by 1863, black people at all, free or otherwise, couldn't come into the state of Indiana. You just couldn't even come. So it's like there was some one-upsmanship right there. And even though, Lincoln ended up seeing slavery as morally wrong, he was still kind of reluctant to join with the abolitionists of the time. And so, I think it said, like, as a Whig Party member, he was working in effort to make sure that, to make sure that slave owners, if they were to aim towards abolition, that the slave owners would receive some sort of compensatory damages. So in essence, compensation for emancipation. But it didn't go off well in any states. Like, even in the state of Delaware, where it said, like, their slave owner class was only about 3% of the population, meaning that slavery wasn't a huge part of their industry up there. Even in the state of Delaware, they were really reluctant to go against anti-slavery measures or seek any sort of compensatory damages for ending that institution. And one thing I thought that was interesting, again, just speaking to my upbringing and all that, in Chicago, we have schools named Prosser, Vitzi, and Wendell Phillips. Like, we know these names. Whereas, I just wonder, like, in a place like Kansas City, where you got schools that are named after, well, I should say, we know these names because these are schools that we attend. So when we go to Wendell Phillips School, as a freshman, they'll either tell you about them or they have you write a report about who this person is. So that way, the name of the person that the school, or the name of the person that, the person that the school is named for. And so so a lot of these names were very, relevant, prevalent in our lives, in our normal, lexicon. Whereas I think in a place like Kansas City, where schools are named Southeast, Northwest, Central, without having any sort of names to them, I always wondered, like, why is that? And so so now it got me to thinking, like, man, I wonder if they even talk about these people, like, before a book like this had to come out. Like, was there any sort of curriculum in the Kansas City high school, curriculum that says, okay, we're going to talk about who these people are and why these people are important. They weren't necessarily Black, but they were people who helped to lead to some of the efforts that were made to, you know, grant your freedom. You know, so I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. What do y'all think on that?
I don't know. Excuse me. I know when I was in high school, it wasn't taught. You know, we had the basic, you know, American history, and that was pretty much it. We never really, even when it was Black History Month, we never. When I was in school, I grew up in Raytown, which was then the suburbs, and you know, we didn't even really get into, you know, the depths of Black history even then during that month.
Yeah, this is Brian. Let me jump in on that too. Also, having grown up in KC and gone to high school here, although I went to Jesuit high school, private high school, the only name that you hear in this area that has anything to do with abolition was John Brown, as a result of, you know, his fights with Paul Quantrill across the state line. But to your point, Chris, there's nary another name to be found. So.
Wow.
And Missouri, you know, obviously we're in Jackson County, and Missouri has a shameful history of its role in perpetuating slavery and fighting with the South, essentially. So there's not a lot. I mean, there should be more, but there's not a lot. There's not a lot of what do I want to say? Local pride in the way that, you know, this community 160 years ago comported itself. So
I almost wonder if that, you know, for good or bad, leads to some of the sentiment that we see in places like Chicago among the youth versus complacency that you see in other places like here. I know that, you know, in some of the conversations I've had offline with some ADOS members, they would just really, and it's always, especially with people who aren't from here, but who live here now, who have the sentiment of like, what's going on with the men here? Or what's wrong with the people here? Why are they so complacent? Why are people in Kansas City so complacent, so okay with the status quo or just getting by versus like actually seeking out and trying to get real change? I wonder if little things like that, like little sparks like that, help to bless you. I wonder if little sparks like that help to, you know, get that started, or, you know, get that ball rolling in certain respects.
Can I jump back in on this again? This is Brian. I think that's such a fascinating question. I totally, as someone who, again, grew up here and was educated here for the most part, although I should say, Chris, I lived in Chicago for 6 years, so that location, that city, that region has a special place in my heart. But it's such a terrific point. Like Kansas City, gosh, it's a place of two minds, and I mean, it's in Missouri, obviously a very red state, a very conservative state. You know, it's adjacent to, you know, the heart of anti-abolition sentiment, you know, in what was then the West in this country, and there's so much enmity, even now, between across state lines, and it's so many in so many ways. It always feels to me like Kansas City is a community that's, you know, psychologically divided on itself, and I think that in and of itself is probably the primary reason why there is so much complacency around here. But that's just obviously my opinion. So. But it's a great question, and it's something I think a lot of people struggle with here.
I think a lot of it is this city is kind of, I mean, it was kind of meant to be a sort of playground. You know, we have a lot of fun stuff to do that keeps us distracted, that keeps us complacent. You know, we have our, most of us have our good jobs. We have our homes and cars that we can kind of sort of afford, and it's kind of like we don't really talk about things like racial justice here, or we haven't up until this year. I mean, and you see it now because of the climate that we're in, of the atmosphere that we're in. With but even with our protests, like you notice the difference between protest here and protest in other cities. Like even in that, like our, I don't know quite what it is either, but our people here are kind of like they'll push, but they won't cross the line.
Yeah.
Definitely
So
not
they'll
now. I
they'll
mean, there've been,
yeah,
yeah.
they'll get out. So you'll see protesters out there in the streets, but it won't be anything like it's been in the other cities. Like that, like they'll only go so far here.
With us in St. Louis, with the Mike Brown situation, if anybody wanted some accurate information, it's a stranger fruit. You can see, I know you can see, it's called Stranger's Fruit, the documentary on Mike Brown and why it was so much outrage, and how St. Louis County did their best to criminalize Mike Brown and make it okay for his murder. That was the outrage. But one thing we must remember, Missouri was a slave state. Point and simple. Outside of the urban areas, it's basically a Republican. And I just wanted to say that the violence with the Mike Brown situation, it was emotion, but it was more than just about Mike Brown. You have to realize St. Louis County, which Ferguson is a part of, has like 66 municipalities. And what they would do, they held Black citizens hostage. Each municipality had their own small government. And this is how small governments, most of them were ran by Black older people and Black mayors, how they played into this systemic system. See, the municipality court judges had no authority. So what they would do, that's why Eric Holder came to St. Louis. You can go to any of these municipalities and on court night, see 300 Black people in line, in the rain, sleet, and snow, for whatever city ordinances. Basically, it was a debtors for traffic, ordinance about your grass not being cut, but St. Louis County getting a percentage of the money from the municipalities was generating like $25 million off of Black people. So we still supported the infrastructure in St. Louis County. It was amazing. Any of these, like, and for example, some of these small municipalities had courts on the same night, and Black people were forced with the fact, whose court am I going to attend? If you don't, and this is what they did, if you don't attend court, say I got court in Pine Line and I don't go because I had court in Veneta Park, Pine Line gonna issue a warrant and say, that's on you. You know, and then they hit you with failure to appear. If you fail to appear one time, you're not gonna know about the 3 other failure to appears. That's an additional $200. So let's say I didn't cut my grass, could end up being over thousands of dollars, and they would lock Black people up. Black people have lost jobs. cash only, bond, or you in court, they'll tell you better call somebody. You got somebody to send you, or we locking you up. And they will lock you in these municipal jails for weeks. Sometimes we've had a couple here in St. Louis who the husband and wife were both locked up for 6 months. They lost everything, home, housing, jobs, and kids. Kids were displaced, all because of some municipal ordinance. And see, what made Mike Brown case so enraging, the then prosecutor McCullough conspired with Darren Wilson. Darren Wilson never gave a statement about what happened. Never gave a statement. It's just, you could see how local governments were able to, like we gonna see like in Wilmington, local governments are able to manipulate Black people. Again, we paid a lot of Black people, if you got a $200 fine plus court costs, which is another $100, plus the original ticket. I'm talking about people can offer traffic violations, people losing thousands of dollars. And that's what went on locally here in St. Louis that was behind that Mike Brown. But I wanted to touch on with this chapter, the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott case, the reason why Dred Scott, you know, he didn't win, but if he hadn't won his case, that fugitive slave law would have been unconstitutional. That was one of, you mentioned the fugitive slave law. Yeah, Dred Scott case would have rendered that unconstitutional. We know the Supreme Court has never helped us, period. I think some of the great minds of the Supreme Court were staunch racists. The court, as well as the city of New York, the financial capital, their mayor at the time even suggested that they succeed with the union. And I had another point that I wanted to make about this chapter, and that was, besides Dred Scott, the Somerset case. I just wanted to say, Irish immigration from 1846 to 1850. During the Civil War, as I learned it at a Jesuit school, they never mentioned that there was racial conflict in the North. The white immigrants did not want to fight for Blacks, period. And it was a lot of back and forth in the major cities, New York, Detroit, all these cities during this period, during the Civil War, they rebelled. They rebelled first for being drafted, and secondly, having to fight for the rights of Blacks. I never knew, like, for example, I guess the movie Gangs in New York with DiCaprio. And I thought about this, basically, they were fighting black laborers. There was a big racial fight parallel going on simultaneously with the Civil War. So we have never really had the alliance of the North that they strongly pushed when they whitewashed the Civil War. That's it.
Well, actually, I was gonna say that's a really good segue into chapter 6.
Yeah.
Because since we are talking about riots and fees that people had to pay, let's go ahead and move into chapter 6 and the atmosphere in New York that led to the draft riots in 1863. So what happened with that is Irish immigrants were competing with black Americans for jobs, and I just thought it was particularly interesting to note that the Great Famine in Ireland of 1846 is what brought masses of Irish immigrants into the United States in the first place. However, what happened is these fresh off the boat um, people unionized and rioted against Black Americans, which resulted in them being able to assert their superiority over us or over our ancestors. So they first came to the United States in the mid late 1840s, and by the 1850s they were unionized and fighting against us. That's crazy. I'll be and then we'll move on into
Yeah.
the draft riots. All because they didn't want to fight the war. They did not want to join the Civil War for whatever reason. Most
Discovery.
most accounts say that they thought that it would be against their own interest to help free Black American slaves, and we can just go from there. All right, Chris, do you have?
Well, I don't know. I kind of wanted to finish. I felt like we didn't quite finish up chapter 5. Just in that, I mean, we were, because I thought it was interesting to look into the finances, that because basically before the Civil War even became a thing or became a possibility of being a thing, Lincoln was trying to buy out, like he was, he was actually like making efforts to buy out the slaves so that we wouldn't have to go to war. I mean, the Civil War ended up costing the Union $6 billion, the Confederacy $2 billion, so $8 billion on the war. Meanwhile, the value of the slaves at the time was estimated at about 3. So they could have released the slaves at the value of at a compensatory damages to the owners at an average of $750 per slave, and still still ended up paying way less than what they paid now. I mean, than what they ended up having to pay plus their lives for the Civil War. And it was like, and there were efforts that were made at that same time, in this thing called the repatriation to Liberia. And I just thought that was interesting, because that kind of goes to what Black people are talking about nowadays. Like even Black people then, between 1820s to 1847, Black people were vehemently in opposition to this, because they were like, why should we go to another land when we built this thing here? That kind of goes to, what people are saying nowadays when people say, well, why don't you go back to Africa if it's so bad? Even the president has said that. Black Lives Matter, why don't you go back to Africa? That's what he said. But listen, we made this thing here. We built this thing here. And I feel like, that's really telling. In, the early 1800s, 1820s, they were saying that Black people, even in opposition, even in slavery at the time, still were saying, nah, we're not leaving, because we built this land. So I feel like that kind of needed to be said before going into chapter 6. My bad. But yeah, as far as going into chapter 6, I mean, the Ms. Avonia was absolutely right with the the Irish who were hugely in opposition to the war, and like you were saying, Kiara, about they basically came over. They weren't even part of the United States, but they were so hugely in opposition to joining the war efforts that they decided to not only be in opposition to the Black people, because they were just in opposition to them because they had jobs that the Irishmen wanted. But once they were now being told that they had to fight in a war for these people, that just opened on full on assault. for them to go on out and start attacking these very black people that they were having like smaller skirmishes, or at least that's what it kind of alluded to, I think, in the book. They were having smaller skirmishes before that, but it seemed like once the war effort started to kick up in the 1860, they were like, nah, we're gonna start like full on attacking these black folks, and not doing so just violently, but also unionizing, so that way we can keep black people from getting over here. And once again, that helps to establish, like, that's like we were just talking about before, that servant class that's right above the slave class.
I wanted to interject and talk about and piggyback what Chris said about this slavery thing. The states, the southern states, first of all, we have to go back and remember that 3/5 of a man in that Constitution allowed the southern states a lot of power.
Yeah.
Okay, so they had more power. And then after the war, I don't want to jump in here, but I just wanted to let you know that to piggyback off what he said, going back to John Brown and Harper Ferry, Virginia raid, when they executed him, he said he had an ominous warning that it's going to take many deaths, to free the slaves. And the South was so adamant about slavery. They basically, again, like you said, all through, before the war and all throughout the war, Lincoln had a plan to reimburse, emancipate. If you emancipate, we'll pay you. They refused. Their adamant stance, they were so arrogant. Their stance was we'll fight. Either our slaves or we're going to fight. There was no in between. They did not want to, end slavery. So again, like you said, we're caught between the Republicans and the Democrats. The blacks are still in between. Both are equally oppressive, as we saw in the North. And it's just it's like a series of recycling. Repackaging. They just repackaging it and dressing it up in a different bow and presenting it back to us, we as Black Americans. We can see the pattern of we as ADOS can see the underlying pattern of being presented the same thing over and over and over again, as far as laws and opportunity.
Like education is always another layer to it.
Like, yeah.
I think we have to realize that even if Southern slave owners had accepted the money, they would have lost their labor. So they wouldn't have been able to continue to grow in their business unless they were able to fund the replacement for that labor.
No, and you're absolutely right. I feel like what that really says is that even then they realized money ain't shit. They realized even then. I mean, so when we extrapolate that to right now with Breonna Taylor's family getting $12 million in a settlement for a wrongful death case, even though nobody was charged with wrongfully killing anyone. It just lets you know that money ain't nothing. We can throw money at you all day. Here. Here's some. This is called shut up money. So I think so. Maybe those Southern slave owners at that time realized that money is nothing in comparison to wealth, and that's what a lot of people start to get, or that's what a lot of people get confused a lot of times. The difference between money and actual wealth.
We were the capital in capitalism, basically. And that's why that was our importance. We were the capital. Even Thomas Jefferson even referred to a Black woman as having the baby as being capital, worth
Yeah.
more than a man slave who you could, whose worth that you could take. But this woman producing a baby was residual income. That's all I have. Did you have something?
I want to say it's almost 10:30, so I do, for the sake of time, let's go ahead and move on to the north. Um, so we're in the middle of the 1860s. We're in the middle of the Civil War, and they're short on shoulders. The white elites don't want to fight, and they're able to pay their way out of fighting. And Irish immigrants are, I mean, they're fresh off the boats, and they're being recruited and drafted into a war that they don't, that one they didn't want to fight and couldn't afford to get out of, so they rioted. And the main takeaway from the NY draft riots, besides the devastations, like New York used to have in Manhattan used to have neighborhoods of Black Americans until the war or until the riots, which pushed them out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty well.
Yeah, I noticed it's kind of going out a little bit. I think
No, I think the biggest issue now is the people behind you, unfortunately.
oh, can you hear? Oh, hold it right here. Okay, yeah. So it says um oh, something else. In the uh I don't know how much I want to speak on immigrants, because we already know that immigrants were kind of sent in as a class to replace us. But I will say that the draft riots involved over 30,000 men, women, and children, immigrants from those 4 days. And when you think of how it wasn't even 20 years before they were elevated to a status above us. That says a lot.
Yes.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, I think that it's interesting that, like, even in today's climate, uh, I think in one of the presidential debates this year, when they tried to ask a question of reparations, and it came to good old, sloppy Joe Biden, his first comment was about how immigrants built this country, and I'm thinking, we weren't immigrants. we didn't come here by choice. We didn't decide to come here. That's not immigration. That's forced workforce, and then a forced um, uh, uh, what is it, integration that was ultimately placed upon us from jump. So that's always weird that we get into like these weird spaces of words where, all of a sudden when we talk about we won't say slavery, we won't say slaves, we'll say immigrants. Like, that's not progressive, and that's not advancing things forward. That's actually burying the cause, and that's not facing the actual issues that are facing us right now, that are hitting us right now. And our problem, in a lot of cases, a lot of the issues that we face is from a lack of someone on one part or another not wanting to face facts. And so that's all I got to say about that immigration piece. Go ahead, Ms. Alvani. Unmute yourself.
In this chapter, you brought up the reparations, and I think the overall sentiment, this goes back to something that Obama said back in 2008. He was saying, I fear that reparations would be an excuse for some to say we've paid our debt and to avoid the much harder work of enforcing our anti-discrimination laws in employment and housing. And one thing I wanted to bring up is, first of all, here in Missouri, I guess most of you don't know who was over the EEOC in what's our Midwestern district in the early 70s. Clarence Thomas was over this district, maybe before he was over the EEOC, meaning they have deduced reparations to a simple solution, just to enforce anti-discrimination in housing and whatever other factors of life. But if you think about it, it is so hard for us to get any anti-whatever laws. And secondly, back to this, back on the 6th chapter, that was that comment. He mentioned Colonel Robert Shaw, and they talked about the competence of the Black soldiers. And we know Shaw's story. That was that glory story with Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman, Dr. Darity and Mullen. They mentioned that. That's on page 114. But what threw me was a woman by the name of Harriet Jacobs. And she wrote a slave narrative. She was a abolitionist, and she wrote a slave narrative, and it was important because it talked about the sexual oppression of Black women, and she did it under a pen name of Linda Bent, and her daughter went on to be one of the matrons of Howard. But this was during the war that I thought it was so unique that she put to pen and paper that she had to hide for so many years to get away from her slave master. So we do have human accounts in addition to narratives beyond Frederick Douglass. That's all that I have. Just something to add towards the end of chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Speaking of glory, I think we want to, if we can, touch on the inequalities that Black soldiers experience compared to white soldiers. And if we already know, well, I know we might not be common knowledge, but I just saw Glory a couple days ago, and I just wanted to, aside from the fees that Black soldiers were supposed to be paid, which they weren't. Also, in the shortage of soldiers, union efforts to enlist qualified men led to the federal and state governments offering payments of up to $1,000 for volunteers. After the first Confederate assault on Fort Sumter, President Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers. Black Americans were among the first, yet they rarely received the promised fee of $1,000 or of the fee of up to $1,000.
Yeah, they didn't receive anything in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So, in what other ways were Black soldiers treated differently than their white counterparts? And
Well, I
that's an
know.
open question.
Oh, okay.
Well, I want to say, besides the abuses that were carried out, physical abuse, the coercion, they didn't get any of the military benefits. And we had out of Shaw's regiment, we had the first Medal of Honor recipient. And I think it was funny that who was that? Eisenhower integrated the military. He made segregation illegal in the military, and that was what when Eisenhower. That was in, I know my parents' generation, 40s, and the treatment of Black soldiers, they noted. They knew we were underprotected, but we weren't protected from the Northern soldiers. They exploited the Black soldiers. But I want to make one noted point that I was never taught. If Blacks hadn't entered the war, I don't think the North would have won. We paid a critical fact, and when Grant, when Lee surrendered to Grant in Appomattox, we have to realize that Mullen and Darity gave the percentage of Blacks, and they talked about how Grant's triumphant command included 1,410 soldiers. 1,250 were African Americans from Louisiana and Mississippi at the pivotal battle of Milton's Bend in Louisiana. If we hadn't joined, I don't think the North would have been victorious, because they were out strategized, because all of the well-known generals that were from West Point, Robert E. Lee, came from the South. They were outmaneuvered, okay? And the strategies being used came from the master strategists were from the South. Again, if Blacks hadn't entered the war, again, we were what's that, 90 or 80% of the soldiers. Some of them didn't get paid. We know they didn't get benefits. The ones that were, I guess we were all free by then, but they got no compensation for the commitment they made to America, and no compensation for the hardships. Not even were they able to get a military pension, and it gets murky, you know, when you deal with the veterans of the Civil War. They got denied. We know they got denied benefits. Not as well documented as you can say with the World War I and II veterans, because I know World War II veterans and World War I veterans and Korean veterans that didn't get benefits. So I can surmise that the Black soldiers, they didn't get anything, but they were proud to serve because it was for their freedom.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I mean, that doesn't go a long way, in my opinion. That doesn't take them, you know, where they need to be. I mean, you signed up for this war, you signed up for this effort in hopes that the people who signed you up were going to maintain their end of the bargain, and maintain, you know, some sort of compensatory damages and some sort of compensation for your efforts. I mean, you what do they say? A day's work, a day's pay. But we weren't getting that, and that's, I mean, ultimately what this all comes down to. I mean, we've done tons of days work and we've yet to receive any of those days pay. But as far as the military goes, one thing I thought that stuck out to me was the fact that the soldiers weren't able to rise higher than the rank of corporal. I mean, that's you know, the lowest level that you could be within the military, if I'm not mistaken. And they have different classes of corporal, but you can't be a sergeant, you can't be a captain, you can't be a lieutenant. You can only be a corporal. I mean, so that in itself was, this just showed one of the many ways that we were, kept relegated, and denied certain freedoms that were supposedly allotted to all Americans. And just to piggyback again off of Ms. Alvania is, I don't think, I mean, even with the northern.
We are connected.
What happened?
It says internet connection.
Oh,
So I just switched from my hotspot back to the cafe's Wi-Fi. So
hey, okay. Well, so just to go off of what and I'll turn it back over to you, Kiara, but just to say this one thing, just going off what Ms. Alvania was saying about the troops being free at the time. I don't think they were all free, but you are right in that about 95% of Grant's army was Black, and a lot of people don't even talk about that. And I find it interesting that just a couple of days ago, matter of fact, just Friday, if I'm not mistaken, Drumpf was talking about while he was stomping somewhere, I think in Atlanta, as a matter of fact, but he was talking about how how Robert E. Lee was, such a good strategist, and he wouldn't have won the war. I mean, he wouldn't have lost the war if it hadn't have been for, all of these other things that had nothing to do with Black people. And I'm just like, oh, okay, well, right on. But he lost anyway. Like, again, why are we elevating somebody? First of all, why are we elevating somebody who lost? 2, why are we trying to elevate somebody who was fighting for slavery? And 3, why are we not acknowledging the fact that this person, or the fact that they lost, was because of the Black effort that was made in opposition on the Union side? That's it.
I think, and again, I agree with Chris. There was no tribunal, no nothing. They didn't even receive a slap on the wrist because President Johnson was a racist. And bottom line, he just opened the door. There was no penalty for the successionists. And secondly, he never allowed us to obtain our citizenship. He never allowed us, and he dismantled the laws that we did have. So much so, Johnson was brought on an impeachment. But you know what? I read that story in Kennedy's Profiles of Courage, but I never knew that Johnson, in Profiles of Courage written by JFK, Johnson is lifted up as some type of hero, and that not that he dismantled this country and upheld systemic racism and white supremacy. I never knew that when I read Profiles of Courage. Never knew that Johnson was the villain. And I think that's something that we need to point out. What Darity's book did for me, it helped me to unlearn all the lies. And he did it so meticulously that the gaps and all the questions that I had pertaining to history has been answered in this book. And this goes to something. This was on page 116. The federal government's investment in Black recruitment translate into real gains for Blacks after the war end. And the question is no. We gained nothing. And we were deserted by the North. And we were left in the hands of local governments, state and local governments. And thus began the reign of terror. I'm talking about a real reign of terror. My great-grandmother, when she died in 1992, that's my grandbaby, excuse me. When she died in 1992, I had 2 kids at the time. She was born in 1891, and I knew her, and I loved her, and I was able to talk to her about what she had seen and the climate of America.
Miss Alvania, you cutting out. I mean,
Yeah, I
you lost
think
the
her
signal.
screen is frozen.
Mm-mm. She froze.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can, I just wanted to kind of move into chapter 7, based off of a comment she just made about how Black Americans hadn't gotten anything after the Civil War ended. That's, um, I mean, we were essentially, like, after the Civil War, we essentially were left to, as MLK says, left to starve, left to the winds and rains and of heaven. But
And now you
Carefree.
cut out. Man, Kiara and Miss Alvania both having issues today with their connection. So this has
It's
been
rough out here these days, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, this has been an interesting interesting day today, to say the least. Technical difficulties aside, I think it's been good though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really want to hear Alvonia's story about her grandmother. That was
Yeah. Me too. I was interested because my grandfather was born in well, I guess my step grandfather was born in 1892, but he passed when I was a baby, so I didn't really get to have those real conversations with him.
Yeah.
Y'all know my grandmother was born in the 20s, I believe, and not the 20s. I'm lying. She was born in the 40s. I'm way off. She was born in the 40s, but she was one of 13 siblings, and I think she was near the bottom. And so some of her sisters, I know a lot of her brothers too, but some of her sisters I had some really interesting conversations with. And it's, whenever we think about slavery and we talk about, some of the things that we've gone through, I think it's very interesting that it wasn't that long ago. Like, we know people like that. And I don't know if that's just a Southern thing, because, we're a little different down there, but, it's a direct connection. Like, when I see slave movies, like, I feel like I know somebody that's experienced it. Like, I've spoken with them. Like, the similarities are real similar.
Yeah, I gained that, or I gathered that. I feel like in many respects, a lot of us don't realize that that was 2 grandmas ago, basically.
Yeah.
Like two sets of grandmamas ago, people were owned by other people. Well, people like me were owned by other people. So so like that is that helps to bring that perspective a little bit closer to home, so people can't be so lofty and saying things like, "Oh, that was so long ago. Why are you worried about it? That was so far away. Why are we still concerned?" I mean, I can understand why people would say something like that, but just because like I said earlier, the truth is hard, and a lot of times people don't want to face the truth. They'd rather have soft lies than hard truths. And that's kind of like where we've been maintaining. However, our freedom, our liberty, our actual survival rests on the side of truth. So for us, at all costs, it's almost imperative that we maintain a level of truth, or as Stephen Colbert would say, truthiness, to our pursuits. Because once we start getting into those veins of lies or soft lies, it lessens the impact of what it is that we're actually aiming for, and it lessens the impact of what is affecting us. So therein, when we start to speak about, okay, well, I'm facing this, or I'm facing, or I see my people are facing this, it's easier to mitigate that. It's easier to lessen the impact of that by saying things like, oh, well, it's not really happening to you. You've got a college degree. You've got a master's degree. You work for X, Y, and Z. It's not happening to you. It's not that bad of an issue. It's it's only for certain people, and you're not one of those. So it almost helps to say, well, listen, you're of a certain class now. Where when we realized, we as Black people, especially in the ADOS, we realized none of that class stuff matters if all of us aren't getting the equality, the treatment, and the freedoms that are supposed to be allotted to all Americans, period.
And to add on that, Chris, I would even, and I think this is more so my perspective. I don't want to put this on ADOS as a unit, but I feel as though even going further than that, when you look at what we've given to the country, what we've sacrificed to the country as a group of people, I would go so far as to say that there is no more American than ADOS American. Like, you can't be more American than we are, because we've given everything for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And we deserve to be treated of that air, of people who have given that much to the country. We should be of a certain air. And now that's me personally. I don't know that ADOS is particularly on that, but I know for me personally, that's kind of the vibe that I get by saying what we're saying. Like, when people find out that, our reparations agenda is, $20 trillion, $22 trillion. Like, yeah, no, we're worth more than that. That's the work that we've put in. That's the sacrifice. Like, I really feel like we have to be, like you said, we have to speak truth. Let's be truthful about the real sacrifice. Let's be truthful about a real debt owed to a people that have been sacrificing and building this country since 150 years before it actually existed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's where all of this should be aimed toward, and that's where all of this should be focused towards. I love when Malcolm X said something along the lines, I'm sure I'm going to mess it up, but basically he talked about, if you own a corporation and you paid every person, $1 in wages. I know he didn't say that, but just, make it easy. You paid them $1 in wages, and they were paid $1 a day every day for 365, 360 days out the year, and you've got a workforce of 10,000 people, but you never pay them. So that means, so every day you make basically 10. So like, you're still producing, you're still making, and you're still putting out product, and you're still making money based on that output of production. You're still receiving funds, but at no point do you pay your workforce just for a day. That's $10,000 you make. Now let's say $10,000 a day for a year, every single day for a year. Now let's just take that and expand that out to all of the different plantations, which each one basically was like its own corporation. Like, let's go ahead and take that and extrapolate that out. That's a hell of a lot of money that's being made but not paid to the people who earned it.
And we know that they earned it.
So I think I'm back for now. I've been going in and out. But just getting back to what the environment was after the Civil War. So there in Chapter 7 there are several examples. There's Timbuktu, the experimental commune, and then there's the Port Royal experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And then but even with both of those, the end result was Okay. So with the Timbuktu experiment, northern ADOS were given grants of land, but they weren't able to maintain it because they didn't have experience with farming. It's noted that if the land had been given to Southerners, they may have been able to maintain it. Also, ADOS were organized in the Midwest, but the jobs there or here, since we're in the Midwest, um, they were low paying, unskilled jobs, and there were still the threats of mobs and bounty hunters. With the Port Royal experiment, um, it was stated that newly freed slaves should have an opportunity to engage in homesteading on land vacated by Southern plantation owners. But of course, we know what happened with the Southern land once
Ah, and she's gone again.
Man,
That's unfortunate.
did
Miss
Alboni and
Albani.
Deb come back online?
No, I was about to say she hasn't even been back yet, so
Man.
she hasn't even been able to join on. But
Hmm.
I'll just say, as far as the Port Royal experiment, oh, you back?
yeah,
Okay, you cut out for a
yeah.
second. There you go.
Okay, I'm back.
You have to start over.
But I'm not gonna start over. But
I was about to say we didn't hear
well,
anything you said.
another thing
Yeah,
I was talking about Timbuktu and Port Royal
right.
and what happened once President Johnson got into office. But something else I wanted to note on top of that is findings from the American Freedmen's Inquiry. It said that widespread poverty among enslaved and free Black Americans, or there was, and they desperately needed emergency relief and a desire for remuneration work was high. So this is after the Civil War, when our ancestors were pretty much left to scrape, and I kind of wonder sometimes why we don't have more resources
And she's gone. So she's about to ask a question. She kind of wanted to know something.
Yeah, she's wondering something.
Yeah, I'll wait for her to come back on that one. Okay, so you said it
There she
cut
is.
out
All
right when you
right.
said you kind of wanted to know.
How it was for Black Americans after the war, because we had nothing.
Right.
So I wonder how, when you consider going in, we're kind of I'm skipping over chapter 8 for a moment, but going into chapter 9 where it really gets into the reconstruction. Oops.
I got you.
So I'm wondering, um, just what happened? Like once slaves were announced as free, where did they go? I mean, they you know, where did they live?
Sure. Well, that kind of led to the institution of the well, well. Before I even get into that, one thing that kind of sticks out in mind to me is the place in Mississippi that was called the Devil's Punch Bowl. So for people who don't know, yeah. So that was basically where they relegated freed black people, quote unquote, to a certain area, and just left them there to die. If they came out of that area, they'd be shot. However, the area was already it was barren. It wasn't allowed to nothing hardly grew there, with the exception of peaches, and you couldn't establish. They couldn't establish a life for themselves. They couldn't establish homes or living structure of any sort. They didn't have anything. They were just out in the wilderness in this area in Mississippi, warned if they left the area they'd be killed, or I should say, under penalty of death, they didn't leave the area. And it just, I mean, that gives a great illustration of how black people were treated, or how all of a sudden, actually, I'll say that's all of a sudden how Black lives didn't matter. That's the typical illustration of Black lives don't matter, right then and there. Like, they mattered all up until when you needed something picked, you needed something lifted, you needed something built, invented, or structured in some sort of way. However, as soon as we can't make $1 off you for free, once we can't get money off you for free, now we institute things like the Devil's Punch Bowl in Mississippi. We institute the black codes, like we've spoke of many times, and vagrancy laws. So, I mean, that's part of that immediate impact on where black people live, what we had, and from what we built, whatever we have to this day.
No.
I think Kiara's, are you there? I see. There you go.
No.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm just kind of getting frustrated because I keep going in and out. So I'm trying to see if I can set this up on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
So if I cut out again, I apologize. It's just one of those days. But I'm trying to.
I know you were speaking on where black people lived and how we lived immediately following emancipation. Uh-oh, and now she's frozen.
Well,
See
she
what happened?
apologized. So
Yeah, she threw out the pre-apology. So I guess that makes it okay. Well, I'm sure, Leighton, you can speak on that a little bit.
what's that?
Just in terms of like the black codes and and what legislation was immediately instituted following.
That's something that I remember, because I wasn't well versed. Like, I was well versed on American history, but then when my eyes started to open up, as they say, I started to think about, okay, when America was successful, what was going on for my people? Because what they telling me is slavery was a long time ago. So then I started, that's when I started, doing my research. So Emancipation Proclamation is in 63. I think the first vagrancy law appeared in like 64, if not 63 itself. And then I was thinking to myself, like, if I just come off a plantation, how am I going to have a job? How am I going to own property? So then I'm straight into jail. And that and this goes on for years. Like I say, the last vagrancy law that I know that was taken off of the books was I think in Virginia in 1972. So from the immediate time we get off the plantation till 1972, we can get locked up essentially for not having anything. And like when you look at that critically, it's like in every opportunity, whether it was the New Deal, which was created for Irish Americans to get the municipality jobs, like so this was around the time you had Al Capone and all those types of gangsters. It was a lot of like terror in the streets. So what they did is they created the New Deal that give all these people jobs, give them opportunity. So these were all your firemen, all of your police force, all of those type of city municipalities were job opportunities that were created specifically for a group of people. And then like when we look at the Homestead Act, the Homestead Act speaks a lot about, like I say, taking up land when they were just marking off land and giving people land as we were expanding westward. We weren't able to take advantage of that, you know, and we were just American as anybody. And so in all of the things, whether it's land ownership, and also this was in the book we talked about, The Color of Wealth. So in The Color of Wealth, it talks about how blacks weren't able to get federally approved loans until like the 40s. So like there was no GI Bill. You couldn't get an FHA loan. Like, and whatever block you moved on, the property value immediately fell. So at what point did we have an opportunity to create wealth? And right after, like you say, right after slavery, Emancipation Proclamation happens. Then you have the vagrancy laws. You have a mass influx of essentially ex-slaves that are now felons. Now they're in jail. And now you have convict leasing. And now they're leasing out the jails just as they do currently today. And Kamala Harris is also doing this in California, where she's having they're convicts, but they're firemen. And that's who are fighting the fires in, you know, or they were fighting fires under Kamala's tenure in California. This is convict leasing. It's
and don't
slavery
forget
of another name.
And don't forget, they can't even become firemen once they're released from prison.
Exactly, because
so now they got the skills to do the thing that they've been doing for free, but now they can't even do that thing and get paid for it.
And it's no, and I tell people all the time, say like slavery is a long time ago. We can draw a direct line from slavery to the present. Like a direct line. Like there's this happening, like you said, and that's not even mentioning Jim Crow. That's not mentioning subprime lending. That's not mentioning redlining and prison gerrymandering. Because I know that was a thing that really kind of blew my mind. Well, they'll take the population of a prison in a rural area, and let's say this prison has 50,000 people, that rural area has the voting power of 50,000 people in addition to that time, just by having a prison in that city limit. So it just goes. The trail just goes. Was Kiara back?
Yeah, she's back. We got it on 2 channels now. So if one goes out, we got the backup.
All right. But yeah,
Oh, you had the game cranium?
If she did, I'll have her go find them. Because I think she was playing over there.
Some of the rocks just look like they do. I just want to make sure we get them back.
Yeah.
Looking around so the dog, so Saints can see. She's like looking around. Where is he at? Where is he at? I want to see.
Okay.
All right. So, I know it's 11:09, Kiara. I don't know how long you wanted to do the or how long you have the chat going. We were kind of into chapter. I guess we kind of started jumping around once we get out of chapter 6. But I'll leave it to you to angle this discussion or to tether it if you'd like to bring it to a conclusion for the day before our next move. So whatever you'd like to do.
Well, yeah, it is 11. Hold on.
Modern technology, boy.
I know. Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, you're doubled up.
Feedback. She gonna have to mute one of the lines,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. She's muted on one. Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So this meeting, um, I don't know. It's just been one of those days, but we're gonna definitely keep the discussion going. Um, we can skip ahead to get to the nitty gritty of the reparations discussion. That's in chapters 12 and 13, or we can just keep going along and get through 8, 9, and 10.
I mean, I ain't gonna lie, I gotta cut out in a little bit, but are we not gonna continue this next week?
Oh, we can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no need of, pressing and belaboring a point that we've been kind of hidden for about 2 hours already. In my
Yeah.
opinion. Yeah, I just kind of feel like this is something that, we shouldn't rush our way through. We should actually, take time to actually discuss and hit the finer topics of each, if if you don't mind. So that way it kind of hits and
Oh, yeah,
stays with us
sure.
a little bit longer than just, a brief discussion and stuff. So that's just my opinion of it.
Sure,
I'm open to.
absolutely. Um, that's actually, I mean, that's fine with me. I feel like today's was so off that we might just go ahead and kind of do a redo next week, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, we can definitely, in here, and next week we'll just, we'll start with, um,
What, chapter 7 or
yeah,
8?
we'll start with chapter 7. We'll
Okay.
start with chapter 7 next week.
Yeah, and I feel like if we do chapter 7 through 10, or 7 through 10 on Saturday, we could probably, then get into that nitty gritty part that you're talking about for Sunday, and really like
Yeah.
conclude the book, with
Okay.
those harder hitting points that they outline in 12 and 13.
That works
Or
for me.
yeah. Miss Albania's back.
Yeah, he's
Hey.
back.
Sorry, fam, we had computer problems. We had to restart the router and restart the computer. We were having serious computer problems.
I am too.
What
Are
did
y'all
we
all on Google
miss?
Fiber?
Yeah, that's what I got. I got the fiber.
I was gonna say, because I had that issue a couple of days ago as well. So I just wonder if that's something that's going throughout the network.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yesterday was
I
a little
think
funny.
it's kind of rainy here today, but I know we have
It's overcast skies, but
yeah.
Yeah, it just started opening up out here.
But what we were discussing is
right.
today was like, I'm not even gonna lie, like it's been so off. Like I've been in and out, and and you've been in and out, Miss Alvania, so and Miss Deb. I think we're gonna continue the discussion next week, and we're gonna start with chapter 7.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not even sure like what this replay is gonna be like for those who missed it, if there is gonna be a replay at all.
Yeah.
And can I comment one thing about chapter 6?
Mm-hmm.
And this is opponents of closing the income gap argue that a system of equal pay would be degrading to whites. And that's all I have to say about that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Darity, Mullen Darity, page 117.
Mm.
Everything is based on public opinion of white folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
crazy.
mean, that just goes more into that, you know, what we've been seeing as far as the repeated themes of legislating a a positional a certain position for Black people and setting a different position for white people. And that's irregardless of class at that state. That's just saying,
A
well,
subculture.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just saying that Black people in general are just like, listen, as long as you know Black people are beneath you, you're fine.
Basically, basically.
Like that's what it basically plays out to be. And I contend the mindset that, you know, somebody has to be of a smarter mind to understand that that's not the case and that's not where we are. Just period. That's not how this thing is supposed to be, and that's not how it should have been run through. We got too many examples in the book and in life that we can draw from that will say opportunity has been made, and there were people of meager thought, if not progressive thought, to some extent, to say, hey, this is wrong. Let's not do this. But we've seen also that there's been so much opposition in the other direction, so much pushback to the point where it says where others are feeling like, you know what, hey, we got to maintain the status quo because I need to make sure that my kids will understand and know that I built the land for them where they could be on top, regardless of anything but their mere virtue of being born white.
That's just crazy. That
Yeah.
is crazy.
Ms. Alvania, you spoke earlier. You were talking earlier before you got cut out. You were saying something about your grandmother. Do you remember what you were about to say? I know we're kind of going back a little bit, about 20, 30 minutes, but you were saying something about your grandmother being born in 1891.
My great-grandmother. My grandmother lived 99 years. My father's mother lived 99 years. My father's grandmother lived 101 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of oral history. A lot of oral history as far as you have to realize my great-grandmother was born before Kitty Hawk 1904, before they flew, before TV. Yeah, and my dad was actually born on Carson's plantation in Marianna, Arkansas, 1935. This ADOS life, it's a way of life. And I'm committed to doing whatever we have to do. Again, I wish our other gentleman was here. I can't call his name right now. But when we go out to build our numbers, I would take a responsibility for North St. Louis.
Yeah, the brother from St. Louis. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
North St. Louis. I will go out to North St. Louis. That's the hood. And we're going to get our numbers up.
And I think we should do the same here. Like, we got to go east of Truth. We got to go to the Paseo. We got to go on Prospect. That's where we at. Like, that's us. So we got to go to where we at.
Give them a goal to fight for, a real goal.
Yeah.
I think the foot soldiers are ready. They just need the guidance.
Yeah, they need direction.
Yes.
Yeah. And while we're seeing that a corporate promised land is not something to fight for anymore because it keeps moving, the levels keep moving to it. I think the youth are starting to realize, well, what am I fighting for? Or coming to that realization.
I think if we realize that the only people we need are us, once we come to that realization, I don't think nothing else is gonna matter. Because I don't need to go to them if I can come to you. I wouldn't need them.
Mhm.
because I'm going through them to get to you. If